So central banks have started to buy, those who don't have much are starting to buy gold to improve their exposure to gold and reduce their exposure to the dollar. Now, the one I look at most, although they're not the biggest buyer, Poland was the biggest buyer, but the one I look at most is China. China did have an increase in its reserves over the last 12 months, and they were buyers of gold at the start of the year and at the end of the year, November and December. Their gold reserves increased, sorry, not their gold reserves, their total reserves increased, but 80% of that increase was accounted for by gold. Two things. One, the buying of gold that they did, and two, by the increase in the price of gold. So notwithstanding that by October, we were looking at an all-time record in the price of gold, in November, when the price had dipped to $100 or $200, it went down from a record of $2,700 and something dollars an ounce to $2,600 and something dollars an ounce. China, who'd taken their foot off the accelerator for a few months, put it back on the accelerator after that $100, $200 drop and started buying again in November. And they bought again in December. The amount of gold they bought in December was twice as much as they bought in November. So the amount of gold they bought in December was twice the amount they bought in November.
I had no idea.
Yep. So I haven't got the figures in my head, but it was more than double in December than November. So despite the fact we are a tiny fraction of a percent off the all-time high, they see fit to go back into the market. And the consequence of that is that a large percentage of the almost all of the increase in their reserves is accounted for effectively by gold. So what does that mean? It means they value gold more than any other asset they could hold.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not the only central bank doing this, but other banks around the world are probably now looking at the Chinese action and saying, well, if they're buying it, perhaps we should think about it too. And if they're going to buy more, which is quite obvious, they seem to be in that in that direction, maybe we should be ahead of the curve and buy before them.
Yeah.
It's having worked in a bank, I can tell you decisions aren't quick and easy to make. It's not like some guy listens to your channel and says, oh, they said buy gold, I better go and buy it for the central bank. He's going to have loads of meetings. He's got to go through the legal department of the central bank, the compliance department, the risk department, the economics department, the head of the bank, and multiple other people who've got to have their say. It's going to take months, if not years, to gradually shift that point of view in a direction from what they've been doing all along. But I think the buying by central banks is set to now start to increase. Central banks are completely insensitive to what the price of the gold is when they buy it, because after all, for the most part, they can print money at any time at ease if they want to and buy gold. They're not going to do that necessarily because that would devalue the currency and be a bit too visible. But we've seen that happening. Well, we see it happening because countries around the world are issuing debt. And what are they doing with the debt? Well, some of it can be used to buy gold. And I think that's what's going to happen. The other reason they're buying gold, I think, is a general level of worry about the treasuries, because most of them hold US treasuries. Of course, they hold bonds issued by the European Central Bank and European governments and the UK as well, but it's mostly US paper.
Yeah.
We have a situation, and we've had it for many years, where nothing is being done to address the rising budget deficits. So the level of debt is rising now faster than at any time in all of history, with the one exception of the COVID year or year two, when it did rise very, very rapidly. But we're certainly way beyond pre-COVID levels, big time. And if you look at the USA, we've got the figures from the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, which shows that according to their own numbers, the level of debt is set to rise at a faster pace than the economy. In other words, that's called the debt to GDP ratio. So the debt to GDP, gross domestic product, the debt is going to rise faster than the gross domestic product. So put that in perspective. If you were an individual in the same situation, it would mean that your credit card debt is increasing, let's say, by 20% a year, but your salary is only going up by 3% a year. Now, the figures aren't quite as extreme as that, but you can see the picture that we have a country whose level of debt is rising faster than their economy is growing. So eventually, in a very extreme situation, you arrive at a situation where the debt is infinity, but we're not talking about that yet. But we will get to a situation based on the CBO's numbers and projecting it forward, where the interest payments on the debt potentially, by the time your children, and certainly your grandchildren, become adults, will be exceeding the total tax take of the country and possibly exceeding the GDP. Now, that's an impossible situation,